You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I'm joined here by Brad Hunt. And today we're back to the book, The Crow Killer, the Saga of Liver-Eating Johnson. Next chapter. Last time, so far, this is a multi-part series. If you haven't heard episode 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, go back and listen to it from the start if you want to. But today we're at the point in the saga where Liver-Eating Johnson has been killing, murdering, slaying, slaughtering, avenging his dead wife and unborn child. He's out there killing the crow. He has a blood oath against him, a vendetta, and he is on his mission to kill as many crows as he can. And there's warring Indian factions and so on. And he's like, his wife was a flathead. His wife's community got into it with the crow to seek vengeance. We talked about that on the last episode. Yep. And today we're going to get into the next part of this saga, which is all of it's pretty wild. The whole thing. Again, if you haven't heard episode 1, 2, or 3, go check it out, because I think there's a lot to get out of that. So let's get into this book. Before we do, I want to remind you, go check out Mountain Ops if you like the show. Get a discount using the code GRITTY. Check out their Ignite, their Yeti, their Blaze shots, their apparel, merino hoodies, and so on. And then go over to Stealthy Hunter and check out their CBD oil products, their CBD sleep gummies, even krill oil and gut health, immune probiotic, rifle covers, and glassing pads, all that stuff over at Stealthy. Yep. When you use the code GRITTY over there, you save as well, and it helps out our partners, and it helps us, because we get a kickback on each time you buy over there and use our code. So helps out the show. So if you're in need of any of that stuff, go check that out. And last, Peaks equipment, gaiters, poles, a backcountry duo headlamp. It's all excellent. Can't recommend it enough. We beat the hell out of it. And even titanium and spoons. Yeah. You know, all of that, long spoons.
And everybody chime in and tell Bryce, hey, dip those suckers in orange.
Yeah. So check it out, and that helps us out as well. So, Brad, let's get into the book here. Yep. We have Winter Holiday Spring Council, Chapter 9. Brad's going to look up some facts about Liver-Eating Johnson while we're reading the story here. And I'm particularly interested, Brad, when you use the Google, I want to know exactly what is it that is beneficial. Like, doesn't eating human liver come with a lot of risk, like mad cow disease?
Damn trash can of the body. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but liver is notoriously known as a superfood.
I know, but it's cooked. Like, I
don't eat it super cooked. I mean, I've had it fairly raw.
Choke it down cooked.
I like it. Liver and onions. I actually like liver quite a bit. If I can, I keep it. And I eat all the liver. Most animals I kill if it's salvageable. And the heart. Liver and heart. I love
heart all day.
Ryan took livers, cooked them up, and then what he did is he
dehydrated them.
He dehydrated
them, and they
dehydrated it, turned it into powder. Then he made liver capsules in which he just swallowed.
I'm good with that. I'm
kind of for the faint of heart, I think, for the weak. You know, us manly men just munch that liver. So,
no thanks.
All right, we're going to get into this. It says, and Brad, as soon as you come up with an interesting fact, you can get back in on the show. But otherwise, you're just a useless bystander.
I've been looking a little bit.
All right, here we go. 36 scalps were like money in the bank. We talked about that. That's crazy. Like, scalps were like furs, even though you can't use them. They're just a decoration.
They're literally like a prize.
I understand a bounty. Like, there were some points where you were offered money for each Indian scalp you got, because it literally was hunt Indians, time. Insane, right? So they were like money in the bank. And Liver-Eating Johnson was a thrifty man with no merely conventional vices. Once home, he doffed his new crow white skin suit and put on old and greasy skins. He never drank. He would live simply and quietly this winter. Though he gave Dell 200 pounds of coffee and sugar and salt and dried fish, his expenditures from his new capital came to no more than 11 scalps spent at Bridger's trading post. He would give his winter to putting his house in order, literally. Dell set off with one of Johnson's pack horses as gift to take the load off in his jughead for the cabin on the Muscle Shell. So liver-eating Johnson has quite a bit of wealth because of the things he's accomplished and done.
Yep.
But he doesn't even spend it. He gives it away or just saves the money. Because he's simple and doesn't care. The things that he wants, money can't really buy. Mm-hmm. There's nothing he really pursues that he needs money for.
So it says he goes on this vengeance for 12 years.
Yeah.
And it's like...
Oh, yeah. It's a long saga. Because as he's doing this, finally the Crow are like, this is it. Okay, and they pick 20 volunteer warriors that are the best of their tribe. And they send these 20 warriors. They're not to come back or whatever until they've vanquished him.
And 12 years doesn't seem that long, but at the same time, 12 years is a while. But, these times are hard.
But think about
tough times.
Think about this. Any man can sneak up behind a man and shoot him in the back.
Right.
Now, granted, there's going to be some men that are harder to do than others, but there is certainly just a luck.
Yeah.
A luck involved in, we know it from hunting, an elk can evade and evade and evade, and sometimes, or a big giant muley, and all of a sudden that one day you're in the right spot, he's in the wrong place, and he makes a mistake.
Right.
Even the best of the best get there.
Right.
So, when it comes to the story of Jeremiah Johnson and this long saga, one of the things the book talks about later, we haven't got to it yet, and we'll revisit it later, is that it's the Crow, it's the nature of the Crow Indian that makes this even feasible. Because the Crows had a sense of honor.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Japanese, right? Like they have this honor where they're like, okay, one-on-one battle in a fair fight is kind of the only way that this vengeance, he's too much of a warrior to be shot in the back from a distance, like he is due the respect. And they have a reverence for enemies that are mighty warriors, sort of a legendary status and respect for them that is expected. And so the Crow, when they go after him, they don't just take 50 warriors and wipe him out. Like some Indian tribes, that's all they would have done is just said, let's get rid of this nuisance.
Right.
Been very practical. But the Crow had a sense of honor, dignity, and warriorship, and their sense of meaning tied to it. According to this book, that's the part of that theory.
Yeah.
Had he tangled with a different tribe in that way, they would have just sent 50 warriors over there to kill him. But the Crow were like, after all this time, he's a legendary foe. He needs to be killed by. It's a sense of pride.
Yeah.
Like he has killed so many of ours. We need to prove our tribe's prowess by sending one-on-one battle like David and Goliath.
Yep.
And so instead of it being, it ends up being 20 warriors in a David and Goliath scenario where the two go against each other in one-on-one combat in a more fair way. And therefore, it lasts 12 years.
Yeah.
And on average, that's 2 a year, kind of,
roughly.
Close to. That he has to come in contact with someone trying to kill him.
Yep.
When you watch the old Jeremiah Johnson with Robert Redford, and he's sitting there on the river, and that one Indian comes up, and he's just painted in black, and his horse is in black, and he's just riding through the swamp, going straight at him.
Yep.
And it's like that one-on-one combat again. Like they send one warrior, he's one warrior, and it is pitched battle between the two. Whoever wins. And there's this sense of having to do it in a fair way.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I'm not surprised when you see certain warriors that win every bout. Like they're just dangerous people.
Right.
I'm not surprised. The speed, surprise moves,
roundhouse kick.
Kick to the head. Done. So anyway, we're kind of going off on a tangent here.
We are.
You get it. So he doesn't care about money really, and he just what he has, and he doesn't eat a lot of white man food in a way as well. Like a lot of the things like coffee and flour and sugar and all that, he actually doesn't use much of because
that's probably why he cut sugar out of his life before it was even cool.
He seems fully dedicated to the native people's diet.
Yep.
More so, or craving that more. I mean, he eats liver.
Yeah.
Human liver. So it says, we're working only when the spirit moved him. Johnson soon transformed his single bare room into a comfortable haven. In a fortnight, he had mudded up the chinks in the walls, hung buffalo robes about them, and spread 3 beautiful bear rugs, 2 black, one from a grizzly, on the earthen floor. He cut and dragged a huge supply of firewood from the riverbank. He thatched the walls and roof of the tattered corral and dragged in a supply of grasses from the valley floor for his horses' bedding and food. Inside, by the glowing fire, he had women's work to do as well, the mending of his clothes. It's interesting how they gather hay. Yeah. They don't have tractors and modern gear like we do, so he just goes out and he gathers hay for the winter for his horse. Just doing it.
And even at that time, they're really not like a... Oh, I just forgot the name of it all of a sudden. Where they're cutting the grasses down. I can't remember what it's called. A sickle. And it's like... I mean, you're out there pulling it. Yeah. And bundling it up.
The snows came late that winter, but when at last they threatened Johnson, stood up one day from the rude stool by his fireplace. He took a beaded doeskin bag from his peg on the wall. Pulling the drawstring, he opened the bag and took into his hand a pair of scalps, their hair so plaited together as to be almost inseparable. Once more he examined that which was the swan's and that which was her killer's. Once more he fingered the killer's distinctive feather and his numerous body ornaments. At last the trapper opened his door and set out afoot down the valley for his cache among the rocks. Long after he had climbed up to his kettle of bones, Johnson sat fingering 2 skulls. That which was a woman's, round through by tribal custom, it should have been flat, ran though, and the other far smaller and almost shapeless of their unborn child. Conceivably, Johnson knew that he was watched that day. Conceivably, that is to say, he had already sensed the presence of a lone Indian prowler who might report on the pair of skulls, the twined scalp, the crow feather, and thus make clear all through mountain country that the liver-eaters' coups were more than accidentally counted over crows. Surely it is difficult to imagine that even in such a moment Johnson so forgot himself and all his training as not to sense that there were eyes upon him. Mm-hmm. In any event, the story would soon be abroad. For long minutes, the fierce, red-bearded killer of the mountains sat fondling his keepsakes. At last, Johnson filled his kettle, set it back into its crevice, and rebuilt around it his cache-like tomb. Before he looked up and around once more, the black eyes watching vanished. No bullet, no arrow came from behind rock or stump as the trapper strode back to his cabin. And the legend grows. Somehow, then Indian eyes had been close enough to John Johnson to observe not only a large skull, but a tiny one as well, and of course the crow feather. There were mountain men who concluded when the story reached them that Johnson was simply touched. But the lonely white women of trading posts and army camps thought the more of him for the story. In their eyes, he was no longer a pariah, but one who had nobly sought revenge for the murder of wife and unborn baby. Henceforth, they would allow their sons the privilege of talk with the great man of the mountains, should he come to trade. The Crow's Indian neighbors would laugh derisively now that a whole people could be preyed upon by one hunter. The Crow's fighting men surely would have to rouse themselves to reprisal. As if to ready themselves for their campaigns against him, the Crow killer slept. All around him, now at last, lay the deep snow. So here he is, transforming his image from someone who just viciously kills Indians and scalps them for money or whatever the motive is to, we get it now. He's doing it because he's avenging his wife and unborn child whom he loved and the Crow killed. Yep. Now everything's okay. Like just murdering as many Indians as possible. It's all for a noble cause.
And it
now.
Wasn't just Crow Indians either. I mean, there's not a lot of others, but there are.
He gets into it with other Indians, but he really at this period in his life, he's deliberately going out of his way only to kill one, just to add salt to the wound and insult to the injury. The thing is, I think that as the story goes, he's he's a legend at this point.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt people are scared of him and stay out of his way. Yeah. And he has a persona. And all the scalps are proof positive that he does a lot of killing. Continuing with the book, it says, he had awakened one morning from a heavy sleep, and at once, as was custom, he opened the door to look out. The snow tumbled in on his floor. All the outdoors was a white blanketing over mountains, valley, and frozen river, and the snow still fell. With a rude wooden shovel, the trapper drove a tunnel from cabin to corral. His horses fed. He crawled back to the cabin, breakfasted, and turned to his weapons on the wall. So he built a cave tunnel to the horse shed under the snow.
Right.
So instead of digging his way out and climbing to the surface and walking, he literally has an underground, shelter deal. Was that common? I suppose I would, because, you want the option of going to...
Yeah.
I guess, simply enough, yes.
Yeah, right.
Just a little bit of work. In his winter wonderland, buried under the earth, under the snow. It got to be warmer under there. Did you build an extra tall chimney?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Another 20 feet?
Exactly.
Another 10 feet?
Yeah.
Because you're 10 feet underground.
Yep.
And now you got a 10-foot more chimney? I mean, you got to admit, it'd be pretty cozy in there, hard to get in and kill you. Yeah. They only have to come in one door.
One door.
One snow cave. So it says, his walker colt, he unloaded, disassembled, oiled carefully with a vial of whale oil bought at Laramie, reassembled, loaded with fresh charges, and hung back on the wall. His bowie knife, fingered most carefully and expertly, he whetted on smooth stone and honed on cured horsehide until the edge would part a floating hair. With the knife safely back in its sheath, he brought out bone, needles, and sinews, and finally tanned buckskin strips and set to making moccasins. This dude is alone for long periods at a time. Not so much as a woman there with him.
No. Well, I mean, he's heartbroken.
It's a little bit dark, dude. One pair he fitted directly to his foot. I mean, Lampers would relate. If he could just be alone his whole life, he might prefer it.
Yeah.
That's a freakish thing to me. I need some companionship here and there, especially from a lady, my wife. That's a lonely life, in my opinion. But anyway, he says, they said, one pair of moccasins he fitted directly to his foot, but the next he measured to fit over the first. Kicking an adversary was more comfortable, he had discovered, when he wore two pairs.
Little padding there.
The inner set with the buffalo hair turned in.
Kind of like a UFC glove. You punch somebody bare knuckle, it kind of hurts a little bit.
You got to keep your feet ready for the fight.
Yeah.
Some said it was a Cheyenne, others a Blackfoot, and still others an Arapaho who had watched Liver-Eating Johnson by his kettle of bones. Somehow many tribes had taken credit for reporting this ludicrous joke upon the Crow. From the fierce and insolent Sioux to the wily Apache far south, the story was repeated, improved, and magnified. At every trading post, the Crows were derided. Did the Crows allow their women and even their girls to join in council, even to leap to their feet and argue fiercely? Then surely the Crows were womanish. Did they allow their children to romp through the council tent, upsetting their elders and creating general uproar? Then surely just such lack of discipline had left them vulnerable to the killer. I mean, basically they're just getting made fun of by everyone because... especially the other Indians,
right?
Because they're getting whooped by by a scary white dude. Sioux and Blackfeet in particular mocked their ancient rivals. Fort Alexander, the Crows' trading post on the Yellowstone, was overrun by foes come to laugh at them. Sioux warriors stood in Crow fighting men's path to draw their fingers across their abdomens and cry contemptuously, "Isankatanka," big knife. Again and again the Crows took up the challenge in hand-to-hand battle to the death, but in ever greater numbers they were beset by the laughing, sneering Sioux. Chippewas, bringing in their furs from the north, sympathized with the Crows, but resolved to keep out of trouble. They hurried back on homeward trails to repeat the tale of the long knife warrior and his bloody vendetta. Crow elders decried the wrong first done by Johnson by young, thoughtless warriors. In their lust to count coup, they had not troubled themselves over what enmity their whole tribe might incur. But whatever the elders might think of original rights and wrongs, they must take action. Johnson himself had clearly forced the issue through his unwillingness to settle for any conventional revenge. Instead of killing a couple, he's just killing endlessly.
Well, right here it says, I found this kind of interesting. It says, according to Johnson's biographers, Raymond Thorpe and Robert Bunker in the book Crow Killer, Johnson killed for the joy of killing. It says they cite one incident in which he poisoned and killed 29 Blackfeet warriors with strychnine biscuits as a practical joke.
Strychnine.
I can't remember. I don't know how.
This is Wikipedia.
That's what I'm saying. It's like there's not a lot of actual facts that you can really find on it.
Yeah, as a practical joke.
Right.
It's like I think that they're taking liberty there because here's the thing, which is annoying because they want to rewrite history as though the white man was awful and the native people were angels.
That's my point exactly.
It's disgusting, this whole history rewrite. Like, I appreciate both cultures. I appreciate both backgrounds.
Yep.
The idea that the Europeans came here and stole the land is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
As human beings have been conquering other human beings since the dawn of time. And before the Lakota had the land, the Cheyenne had it, and they stole it from the Cheyenne before them. And every country on the planet at this point is living there as the conqueror of the people who were there first.
Right.
Now that we have become a little more gentrified and more civilized than we were back then, it's easy to sit here and say how wrong it is to overtake someone by force and force them out of a place. You got to understand, that was the mode of for human history.
Right.
And it's arrogant to say or to pretend that you wouldn't do the same. Because in that time frame, people forget today. They don't realize that people 100 years ago even were just trying to survive.
Survive, exactly.
125 years ago, 140 years ago, it was month to month, mouth to mouth, like barely hand to mouth, barely able to survive.
Right.
So it's like what happened back then. People were more ruthless because they had to be.
Right. It was live or die. Kill or be killed type thing.
And so only with the luxury of civilization do you get to sit down and eat your Mickey D's and complain about the injustice of it all.
Yep.
It's so ridiculously disgusting to see people behave this way. It's just so utterly disappointing because the only reason you get to pontificate about the morality of people 150 years ago is because you have the luxury of doing it in your modern world.
Yeah.
If you were starving to death or having trouble meeting means to an end and the average lifespan was 40 years old, you would be behaving differently as well.
Right.
And not until the general world became more wealthy are we able to do what we do today. And we should be good to remember that, because another thing that's interesting is right now I'll hear people say, you'll see some feminists say, I don't need a man. I don't need a man. I can live without a man. You can live without a man in the modern, right now in this country.
Yeah.
Let's throw back to 200 years ago on the plains or in other civilizations.
Correct.
Not only does a woman need a man for protection, safety, for making money and all of that, but mostly protection since the dawn of time. A man needs a woman.
Yes. Or
he can't make it either.
Right.
And you certainly can't have a family. And then you can't, as you get older, have someone take care of you as you get older, as you bring up the next generation, that's your retirement. That's how you survive a little longer than you would be if you didn't have children.
Exactly.
That's all done in partnership between a man and a woman and a family and children. And the whole thing, all of it's just sort of insane today, the way people, again, it's a modern luxury belief that you get to have because of the wealth of the country you live in.
Well, and then you're bashed if you're doing so-called manly things, and you're
heroic deeds. It's like, it's insane.
Yep.
So here we are, and Crow elders decried. They were disappointed. They were bitter over what's going on. So the Crow elders decried the wrong first done by the young people. So they're upset about how their youth did this.
Right.
And they he had forced their hand, it says, and sort of, because his revenge is just so unending, instead of letting it drop, he just keeps going, that now they're being ridiculed and mocked, and they have no choice but to somehow retaliate in order to save face and keep going, because he's taken his revenge to the nth degree. So it says, Big Robert sat stately in his buffalo horn headdress, ready for council of war. He had called this council, to be sure, only at the request of his sub-chiefs. But his younger warriors perhaps judged their chief by his apparent hesitancy. They had before them, strung across the front of his lodge, the signs of his plentiful coups, scalps both red and white. And if Big Robert had no longer quite the strength that was his when, armed only with a scalping knife, he had killed a mother grizzly, his impressive presence was still that of one of the greatest fighting chieftains of his time, one whose judgment no tribe imputed. Stung perhaps by Sioux criticism, Big Robert had excluded from his council chambers all but the most venerable of his people's women. He stationed stalwart warriors at the entrance, with long strips of bark tied with sinews to discourage children and dogs. His own aged and wizened mother did hobble in. She sat down now close by the medicine men. Warriors who knew the liver-eater talked of strategy, and Big Robert's mother in turn rose to say how surely even such an enemy could be destroyed if only crow-fighting men would estimate him shrewdly. So here they are, having a war council. What do we do? And what's unique about the Crow compared to some other tribes is that they go out of their way to have the women have, a strong say in things at council meetings, when some other tribes didn't do that very often or much at all. And you see that across, there are certain tribes who regarded women at much more equal levels, or even let the women were the sole deciders on certain aspects of the community, and then the husbands were the other deciders, giving the women a very big role. I think that this rewrite of history that men have of the hierarchy has oppressed women for thousands and thousands of years is just a stupid and naive, boiled down binary argument on reality.
Movement. Come on.
And it's like, no, human beings, men and women, surely, yes, there have been times when men use their power and strength to hurt a woman, and vice versa. Women have done things to destroy men. They're both capable of doing terrible things to one another, but by and large, what human beings have done, men and women have done, is partner together to survive, and they have cherished each other as co-equal partners in an endeavor, and they had different roles and desires and things to fulfill, and here we are today with people trying to rewrite that history as well, and it's also such a boiled down black and white perspective that it lacks any nuance. Anytime somebody says the sole cause of blah is this one thing, I'm like, nothing is ever that black and white. There's so many factors that play a role.
Right.
All right, so it's going back to the book. What else did you find about eating livers, Brad? Why is your phone down there and not in your hand?
Because there's not a lot on liver-eating Johnson.
I'd like to know some more.
True and not true.
I'd like to know some facts about what kind of nutrition I can get out of eating a human liver.
Oh,
come on, Brad.
Nothing.
Crows must not let it be said that they had accepted such a limitation. So they're sitting here like figuring out what they're going to do. Finally, Big Robert announces his decision. Dopiep Absorka, or Crow Killer, had already shown his skill in smelling out attack. Should 20 warriors be sent in a body against him, he would merely pick off those who might, in natural impatience and lust to kill, ride for a moment more rapidly or seek thoroughly than the rest. In any event, Big Robert disliked even to speak of such a thing, but it must be faced. To send a whole body of fighting men against a single adversary could bring only further contempt on the Crows. So again, it's a pride thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you had to kill them with 20 warriors at the same time? You couldn't just send one guy?
Right.
One guy couldn't do it? Come on, one guy? You guys are so weak
Not
that you got to
with Jeremiah Johnson.
And so, again, it goes back to this. Now that they've been embarrassed and now that things are gotten out of hand, it's sort of, if you think about this, if you've seen The Gladiator,
yep.
Right?
Oh, yeah. I used to watch it every Thursday night before a Friday night football game.
Yeah, it gets to the point where it's like, well, crap, I got to fight him.
Yep.
Because if I don't fight him, I look weak and he looks powerful. He's insulted me. He's done this. He's done that. But what happened was he tried to get him murdered a million times. It just didn't work. And now they're like, oh, crap, now I've created a legend. Now I have to not only kill the man, but I have to kill his legend. I can't just kill him now. Otherwise, his legend will live forever. I have to go out and fight him in the arena. And I'll cheat behind the scenes, and I'll try to make it work.
Stab him in the back as I give him a hug.
But what happens? It's like they keep getting beat, and so here they are. They're like their pride makes it so they decide to fight him one-on-one instead of in a big group, because otherwise the legend would live on, and they need to get their reputation back as dangerous warriors and so on.
Yep.
So. It says that let the Crow Council then make use of the intrepidity of the very best of Crow warriors. So he's thinking their willingness to face death in heroic service to their people. So he's like, what we're going to do, let the Crow Council, he says, let the Crow Council consider how best to multiply the chance that one warrior, at least, could reach the Crow Killer. Let a score of single warriors be sent on separate trails to take their single chances, till one of them should prove shrewder or luckier than their prey. Let none of the braves return till the White Killer was dead. So there's somewhat of a sense of honor here, or pride, or just, they know how bad it looks, and now they gotta like step to it. But it's really interesting, right? Like, you can see how this might play out. Big Robert's mother, it was, who went among the brave, selecting from among the fiercest and most agile. This one for his rashness, and that one for his cunning, another for his lightning speed, and yet another for his endurance. Her black eyes snapping, she whispered to each she chose their people's demand that they give themselves unreservedly. Indeed, though some of those chosen sought their foe for years, they were none of them to return. And the legend
Johnson is just a badass.
And the legend grows, right?
Can you think of being one of those warriors, like, I got chosen to go try and take this guy out.
Right.
Yeah, you think you're kind of a bad A until you're like, dang, I really got to go fight Jeremiah Johnson. Like, what am I going to do,
His legend, every time he wins, it gets worse.
Yep. Like, how can I defend the roundhouse kick?
So it says, Johnson never told how he destroyed 20 such Crow warriors, one by one. And since during the years when he killed the first 17 of them, he still kept himself pretty much alone. Fellow mountain men observed his killing of only 2. So he has 2 witnesses that observed two separate
killings.
Where he was attacked by a crow.
Yep.
They say there's 17 of them though, That means 15 were unseen. The legend, as the legend says. So they're saying, how much of that is true?
Yeah.
We only have 2 witnesses and their stories. No doubt the story of all 20 killings would illustrate the full extent of Johnson's craft above all his capacity for estimating others' craft. His readiness for his opponent's every variety of move, but in any such story the refrain, he snapped off the scalp, he carved under the ribs, he ate the dripping liver, must become not merely monotonous, but intolerably sickening. Liver-eating Johnson likely served his saga best by leaving this chapter to his contemporaries and our imaginations. Only one fact did he provide, that each of the 20 was slain hand to hand. Each, in his last moments, knew himself victim of the Crow Killer.
Yeah. I mean, that is hand-to-hand battle like that, life or death.
You could see how a guy that's just good is good.
Yeah.
You see the athletes in sports that just seem to win every freaking time. Or in fighting, you see a dominant fighter in the UFC or something, and you're just like, can that guy be beat?
Right. Eventually there is, age or whatever it may be catches up to him. There eventually is.
Should be, but also you're talking about, like, for instance, someone who is as incredible of a fighter as your top UFC legends, right? And then if you were to take the meanest person in a certain city,
right,
you may not ever find one to rival that. Now, if you took the meanest person across the world, no boundaries,
right,
you could. So it just could be that, for example, Liver-Eating Johnson was just amazing, and the Crow tribe from which they pulled the fighters, there was just no one that was at that level. It's just legendary.
And you got to think that there's obviously genetics and ability and things like that do play a role, and I don't know.
Yeah, this is wild. So we're going to continue here. It says, from all accounts, Liver-Eating Johnson was astonished by the respect and above all the desire for friendship suddenly shown him throughout mountain country. Did you find anything about Big Robert in there?
I did not.
I need some context.
I got
to this
some
story.
liver facts here.
What are the liver facts?
And this all the plant-based food eating peeps are probably gonna get mad at me, but 3.5 ounces of liver, which is tiny, small, surpasses all of that in most plant-based foods as far as nutrition, vitamins, everything like that. You're getting so much out of a liver, and I get that's why people eat it.
Yeah.
But it's like, I just can't bring myself to eat raw liver or liver.
There's some sort of taste, like when I first take the first bite of liver and onions, I start to gag a little. And then the second bite, I start to be like, oh, that was okay.
Maybe I need to get past the second bite.
By the third bite, I'm like, I gotta eat more. It's like there's something in it that's initially triggering, and then you can't stop yourself from eating a pile of it. It's weird.
Haven't got past
it's a weird
that point
food.
Then.
But apparently the warmth of feeling expressed by some of those whom Johnson came in contact was not displeasing to him. At length, like any gregarious mountain man, he took to visiting the camps of other trappers from time to time and swapping news about trade and the tribes. His own story he saved, though, for a very few old comrades, especially old Bearclaw, Lap, Bigfoot Davis, and of course Del Gue. Even now, Del asked Johnson no more questions than Johnson apparently wanted to answer. But the details Del observed for himself are enough to give the impression of a Johnson almost comfortably settled into his, quote, family, the close friends, and his, quote, place as 1,000 miles of wilderness. This is a Johnson who seeks no trouble with any man, not even the Crows, and who is really rather appalled when mountain men outside his immediate family come bursting around to stage him a revenge against some Blackfeet. Once vengeance by Johnson's code should be one's own. So don't drag me into your dispute with these Indians. That was between you and those Indians. Yep. I took care of my own Indian issues. You take care of yours. What one could do for a friend was outfit him anew in his time of need, except for his ministrations in one's own time of sickness, and perhaps as with Portuguese Phillips, help him through some desperate adventure, then pull out so that glory might be his alone. By prearrangement, Johnson met Delgue at Fort Pierre in the spring of 1855. Typically, his first re-entry into partnership was for Johnson primarily an act of friendship. So what is this, 4 years after his wife's death? 5 years?
Yeah.
For Dell, the year before he had been captured by the Sioux, barely escaping with his scalp, had lost his pack of furs. Traveling with Johnson to the Wind River Mountains, he could figure to recover himself financially. Johnson purchased the necessary outfit for both, and they were off. The camp on the Muscle Shell was conveniently on the way, and accordingly, Johnson could pass by Crazy Woman's place. 9 years now after her tragedy, Jane Morgan had many assistants among mountain men. Yet Dell was a little surprised to gather how regularly Johnson had checked in through the years of his feuding with the Crows. And after Johnson, afoot for the last 100 yards, he carried in provisions, Dell was fair startled. They were mounted again and riding behind the cabin to get back on the trail when suddenly Dell drew rein. "Something peculiar here," he cried. They faced the quadrangle of graves with the 4 posts at the corners of and a grinning skull on each. Johnson, too, pulled up to hear whatever his partner had to say. "Them skulls," Dell said. "They're shiny. They're new." Johnson chuckled. "Sure, skulls don't last," he said. "We puts new ones up regular." That's dark.
Oh, man.
That's dark.
Regular.
But I think that's also what keeps the Indians away from her. She's touched. She's crazy.
Yeah.
And part of keeping that legend alive is keep the skulls fresh.
Right.
Dell, by his own story, asked who we might be besides John Johnson himself. And when Johnson suggested that, I skipped a spot. They faced the, Dell, by his own words, John Hatcher. "Come, it's getting late," Johnson said. "You know what that means." Dell did know how Crazy Woman took the coming of darkness, that hour at which she had been bereaved. Indeed, the trappers were hardly a quarter mile distant from the cabin when they heard her piercing shrieks. "If in their Blackfoots heard that, they'd drop dead," said Dell. "If in their..." And so she's a little bit off, a little bit crazy. She's out there alone, and every night she goes out and shrieks.
Because how long did she live again?
Quite a long time.
It's
I think it's 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Because
she's crazy.
It's been 9 years so far. 9 years.
Which is,
it's a long time out there.
A long time. Like with the Indians and predators and disease and hunger.
Did you find out about Crazy Woman in here?
I'm looking right now, actually.
Man, Brad, keep up. After 2 nights in their own camp on the Muscle Shell, the partners started on their long trail south to the Wind River Range. At a trapper's camp on the Bighorn, they found Bear Claw nursing critical wounds, but lively enough to make a good story of how he had earned them. In a scrap with a grizzly, not dead as it had seemed, but merely stunned by a bullet. "Great Jehoshaphat, Pocahontas, and John Smith, no," the old man roared, and he shook the bear's huge claws in Johnson's face. They asked him if the bear got him, and he's like, "No. Ye stay the night now. I can take care of you," he insisted, and protests. He was still weak. They had to accept his hospitality, so no liver, he said, as an apology, just fresh venison. So he invites him to stay, and they stay, and he's like, "I ain't got any liver, John Johnson, but I do have some venison."
Yep.
The partners would be 8 days riding after they left Bear Claw. On the 7th, Dell was concerned to find the ashes of an Indian campfire where none was to be expected. But Johnson assured him that those who had camped there were Blackfeet. He could smell them. They rode on steadily, and that night made camp on Owl Creek in an old cabin Johnson had used many times before. Dell kept a close watch to see whether his partner's apparent unconcern was real. As darkness came on, their campfire crackled and glowed in the darkness, lighting up the fringes of the bushy copse among the rocks around them, but making of the trappers themselves all too obvious a target for a foe. So they're basically got a fire going pretty big and trying to just look like they're having a fire thing going on here in this country. Finally, Dell could restrain himself no longer. "You said them last ashes were Blackfoot. Can't you tell Blackfoot from crows no more?" Johnson grinned, knocked out his pipe, and slowly rose from the log where he sat. "Figured maybe I could make you think I didn't know," he said, "but reckon you did. Kick out the fire, Dell." He stepped slightly back into the scrub. Dell did quickly scatter the embers and stamp them out. Then he too stepped away into the shadows with his rifle full cocked. So when they came upon that sign, they knew it was actually crow. And so that means that perhaps they're being hunted.
Yeah.
Johnson grinned, knocked out his pipe, and slowly rose from the log where he sat. So they go into the bushes. Dell stood straining to hear some sound of which might be going on, but all that came to him was the sound of the munching horses tethered nearby. At last he heard a muffled obscenity. Johnson's, he thought, and a grunt in another voice, and another voice. There was mixed in with these sounds the thud of moccasins brought heavily against flesh. Into the faint light still shed by a few smoldering embers there sailed his rear quarters highest, a huge crow warrior. The warrior had no sooner scrambled to his feet than he found himself facing Johnson. Come after him with extraordinary speed. He had time only to lift his tomahawk before he could bring it down. Another mighty kick from Johnson caught him in the groin, and the weapon fell from his hand. Johnson stepped in, and, with what now seemed slow deliberation, buried his bowie in the crow's chest. In fact, the entire action had taken only a few seconds. "Let's have us a fire again, Dell," the crow killer said. Jeez. Dell did rebuild the fire, though remonstrating that there might be another Indian in the vicinity. Johnson sat on his log again and filled and lit his pipe. "Listen," he said, "or number 18. Just 2 of their 20 left."
I mean, just like it's nothing. Like, dead. And then, hey, this gets fire going again.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, it is kind of like that.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, you stop being, when you've been in that pickle before many times.
Kind of like feeling.
You kind of like, you're like, yeah, I think if you're a real warrior type human.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you see it in World War II stories and other battles over time where warriors that survive a long time, they get to the point where they're just really efficient and they don't feel much,
right?
In that moment. Is interesting. It says, "This was an occasion, if ever there was to be one, for inquiry into Johnson's feuding. Indeed, Dell secured that night an almost academic analysis of his methods. First, there was the strategy of the kick to be explained. Johnson kicked them into position, he said. Hadn't Dell noticed how naturally the brave, trying to straighten up after the kick, had instead ended up on Johnson's sticker? So he's a good fighter, and he fights, and then he uses their own momentum to kill him or to stick him or whatever in a fight.
Just good at adapting.
Yeah, he just so outclasses their ability. And honestly, I don't think people who haven't been kicked by someone who knows how to really kick has any idea. You manage distance, you manage the fight. Yeah. If you can hit that guy and he's too far away or he's too slow to get his weapon up and hurt you, it's like legs and feet are dangerous, more dangerous, hit harder by far that way.
It reminds me of a time we were younger. I think I was in high school. My brother thought he could do some roundhouse kick, and as he did it, he popped his knee, and I mean, like on the ground. So it takes some skill to do a roundhouse kick.
After a few moments of smoking and meditating, Johnson stood up again, tested the edge of his knife on his thumb, and began another sort of demonstration for Dell. He grasped the dead man by his top knot, ran the point of the blade in the familiar pattern around its base, then whipped off the scalp in so dexterous a movement that Dell swore the head could not be seen to move. Hatcher, of course, could be excused for not having achieved such a refined method. That coon never had no practice like I did. The crow killer leaned once more over his victim and his partner, well aware of the next step in his practice, endeavored to postpone that bloody moment. "How many reds you reckon you've scalped?" Well, the casual answer came, maybe, not counting a few poor diggers, some 400 or 500. He threw the scalp to his partner and stooped again, knife still in hand. Don't liver eating. Don't do that. Now liver eating. I'm gonna gag. Gag then, Johnson said, and with a delicate sweep of his bow, he opened the dead crow's abdomen. Then he thrust in his hand inside. So Dell tells this story over the years of being there, seeing the fight, killing the Indian, and eating his liver. So the legend grows out of this eyewitness account. And then another trapper who spent a lot of time with him is the same. And they're kind of in shock with the cavalier nature with which these things happen, how he handles it. He's a freak.
Right. When they say that there's, they say he could have killed up to 1,300.
1,300?
Yep, 1,300 of the Indian people.
In general. Well, you hear about hundreds a year on some of these guys.
Right.
So one of these guys, he's half white, half Indian.
Yep.
So he's basically scorned by both communities.
Right.
He has nowhere to fit, and he just becomes an Indian hunter. He just murders as many Indians as he can.
Yep.
Look, these are some wild times out there. All I got to say is karma usually comes back to those.
It's coming, Pedro. It's coming.
Yeah. So it says, in the early fall of 1861, the Crow Killer helped Dell set up a winter trapping camp east of the Continental Divide. As in their other years of partnership, their plan was to pool the profits of separate adventures. Dell was in trapping location Bigfoot Davis had recommended and would use Bigfoot's lean-to for shelter. Johnson helped Dell set out his trap lines, then set out to trade in the camp of his Flathead kin in the Bitterroot Mountains. Now, it must be stated at once that, by his own standards, Johnson deserved some of the punishment he was to take on that expedition. The product he planned to offer the Flatheads in trade was one he would not touch himself. He had purchased 2-gallon kegs of whiskey from a trader, two 20-gallon kegs of whiskey from a trader on the Missouri.
So much whiskey.
The sale of whiskey to Indians, granted, was not as direct an incitement to murder as the sale of rifles, which, of course, Johnson damned as violently as any other mountain man. But, though some Indians even then could drink companionably, as yet most had learned nothing about alcohol but the frenzy a keg could add when already excited warriors drank together. And we all know, alcohol, or what is it, firewater, or whatever you want to call it, is, in general, Native peoples don't do so well consuming it.
Not at all.
It has an addictive...
It has an effect,
they're not adapted to it the way that...
Right. The white men.
White men have been doing it a long time. Ironically, Johnson was to see his whiskey drunk by despised Blackfeet as their prisoner. So he's going to be captured here in a minute, and you're gonna hear this story. Now, this story is insane. I think this is the one. This will make you gag. All right, you ready?
Yep.
Delgue had one protest to make, that no horse could carry such a load as 40 gallons. And likely Johnson did move more slowly and more noisily than usual on this trip because he had 2 kegs, which is 40 gallons of whiskey. But Johnson laughed. Besides a pair of pack horses to carry his usual trading items, he had a powerful sorrel stallion and an especially prepared heavy canvas sling the kegs rode easily. On his own big black, the liver-eater mixed his goodbyes to Dell with some derision for his lack of faith in a mounting hoss, and he set out on his 500-mile journey west. Once alone on the trail, Johnson was his watchful self. He moved his animals slowly, for he knew the dangers ahead of him, and the loss of so much whiskey would in itself be as the loss of a good season's catch of furs. This is a perilous journey to deliver whiskey like that. He knew he must watch not only for Crow warriors, but especially for Blackfoot, now on the warpath. His route was to take him across the Sweetwater through the headwaters of the Green Mountains and into the hazardous Owl Creek Range. Whole wagon trains of immigrants had been massacred there, and more trappers had died in that stretch of Indian country than in any other. Johnson drew on all his remarkable powers of observation and instinct to protect his life and his cargo. For once, those powers were not enough. He knew, of course, that the narrow trail ahead threaded one afternoon was especially apt for ambush, but apparently he sensed no hostiles till 2 arrows sped past his head. Though his Hawken lay across his saddle, there was only the surer death in his raising it. The warriors were behind the rocks. There was nothing at which he could do to shoot. Quickly he studied his circumstances and sized it up as hopeless. He dropped his rifle and raised his hands. The capture of such a prisoner was a magnificent achievement for the wolf, the young Blackfoot chief who leaped down into the trail from a rock above. As his warriors swarmed round him, he danced in jubilant pantomime, then cried in excellent English, "The killer of crows has at last been taken." "All things come to pass," his captor replied. "The wolf has taken his people's foe." Johnson shrugged. "I ain't no enemy of the Blackfoots." The wolf tapped a knuckle against one of the kegs. "Whiskey," he said. "Where do you take this whiskey?" "To my friends the Flatheads," he said. "Turn me loose." But Johnson saw already that he had said the wrong thing, that for once his knowledge of the tribes and their enmities had failed him. The wolf's face froze into a joyous certainty now of what he might do. Hand on thigh he spat, and his eyes sparkled with hate. "The Flatheads are squaws," he said. "We will bargain for your life with the crows. Their killer is doomed." At the wolf's order, warriors stripped Johnson of his crow hunting jacket, his Colt, and his bowie, but not his flint and steel. Unarmed and naked to the waist, the trapper was driven afoot and steadily beaten with the flats of tomahawks. At the Blackfoot camp, he was bound with thongs and thrown into a teepee. He was grim, he was angry, and he was contemptuous of this chief who had taken him prisoner. A Crow chief, he thought to himself, would know better than so to humiliate a liver-eating Johnson. A Crow chief would either kill such an enemy at once or set him free. Methodically, Johnson set to tallying the details of his situation. By his own good luck and further Blackfoot mismanagement, his hands were fettered in front of him. He would have, it appeared, but one guard, and that only a youth. And outside already he could hear a rising excitement which could mean nothing but one thing. The Blackfeet were at his whiskey. "Come dark," he muttered to himself, this coon won't be here. So I cannot read this stupid writing. Come dark. He's not going to be there anymore. He's escaping. Then perhaps with the guard's knife against what animals he met, and his own flint and steel against winter's cold. What a weird sentence. It was clear from the manner in which his guard eyed Johnson that he never counted coup. He fingered his long knife lovingly, in an almost desperate desire to be the warrior who might take the scalp of the crow killer. Then he turned on his heel, forced himself away from Johnson. He knew that the wolf would surely have him killed should he murder so valuable a prisoner. And each time that he turned, Johnson sank his strong teeth into the rawhide thongs that bound his wrists. Should his guard stare at him too long at a time, Johnson stared back. The Blackfoot managed a truly ferocious glare, then again turned away, and Johnson worked a few seconds more at his thongs.
Just chewing that away.
The late afternoon brought evidence that despite the increasing din outside, the wolf was firm in his resolution to sell Johnson alive. For an old woman came to him with an earthen bowl of dog, or perhaps muskrat soup. Telling the story later, Johnson described a dish that was greasy, thick with hair. Gross. But offered such a meal, he made no fastidious complaint. He wolfed it down to maintain his strength. He relaxed, too. Johnson always could relax when there was no purpose in effort. Arms across his face, he hunched over his knees as if to sleep. And, as he hoped, His guard increasingly looked away from him toward the entrance, toward every revelry outside. Johnson gnawed away at the thongs about his wrists. At last the warrior's desire and Johnson's were satisfied. The same old woman brought in a pannikin of liquor, then left. As his guard raised the vessel to swallow, the trapper strained and burst his bonds. The Indian turned and looked at Johnson derisively, tapped his knife with meaning, then again raised the whiskey to his lips. At that moment Johnson acted. The young Blackfoot could hardly have known what struck him. First he was raised from the ground with a kick that must in itself have crippled him for fighting. Then, as somehow he whirled knife in hand, the pannikin spinning off against the soft wall of the teepee, he took a blow as of a sledgehammer between the eyes. Any cry he might instinctively have made was lost in a splutter of whiskey. What moan he did make as he fell was too slight to be heard outside.
So it says the average human can kick with 1,000 pounds of force.
What does that even mean?
So I'm like,
that's intense.
Right.
Like, I mean, 1,000 is a big number.
I think like a dog bite is, well, they say like 780 psi or something like that, you know. But I mean, that's a lot. Like 600 pounds. The average child can deliver 600 pounds of force.
So, 1,000 for an adult. What does an elite kicker? Like
that's
an
what I was trying
athlete
to look. I mean, it's got to be up to.
Joe Rogan bends the heavy bag in half.
Yeah,
right. Johnson knew he had little time. The old woman might return. There must sometime be a change of guard. Seizing the guard's own knife, Johnson quickly lifted the scalp and tied it to his own belt. Next, slit the buckskin down from the guard's left leg, felt the flesh, ran the knife's keen edge around the hip, and cut to the bone socket. Seizing the knee with one hand and the ankle with the other, he twisted and snapped the whole leg from the body.
Whew.
All was done so deftly that the victim lived.
Oh, it's like a crocodile just tearing it off.
He basically took that guy's ass, and everything up to the hip socket and popped it out of him. Now, I think there's some major arteries that flow right there. There's
absolutely
no way you can cut that and he doesn't bleed out.
No.
Like, the book is, how do you do that deftly and not, like, great, you popped it off, but I don't see, he'll be alive for a while, but
how quickly would... Apply pressure.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, the story is a little, but, okay, so you get it. He kills the Indian. Well, he knocks the Indian out.
He B-legs the Indian.
He scalps him, and then he grabs his leg.
Yeah.
Cuts his leg off. Why, Brad? Johnson stepped quietly into the fast-gathering shadows of night. For a moment, he contemplated the band of drunken warriors. Then, the bleeding stump over his shoulder, he stole away. The Blackfeet, when they thought to check on the prisoner, would find only the maimed guard quivering, stunned, totally incapable of speech, and bleeding to death. The weather turned rapidly, bitterly cold. The leg which Johnson carried over his shoulder, gnawed here and there around the hip, was frozen solid, meaning he's been eating this leg for a while.
Cool.
He himself was naked to the waist. He had no real choice of destination, for the Flatheads camp was 300 miles ahead of him, and his own camp 200 miles behind. He must decide, then, whether he had some faint chance of protecting himself from the weather here in the Owl Creeks, or whether he must cover those 200 miles.
I have no
300
words.
miles to
the
Flatheads and 200 miles back to his
cabin.
home. And all he's got right now is a little bit of clothing. He does have his flint and steel, and I believe he has a human leg.
Yeah. Now, is he eating this raw?
What I like, yeah.
Like,
eating it raw. It says he's gnawing on the bits until it froze solid. Now he's moving, but the meat is frozen solid, so he can't eat it because it's frozen. But he still got it on him.
See, he has his flint and steel, but he probably doesn't want to start a fire because then that gives his location away.
Correct.
And so he's like,
He was 3 days in putting the first 10 miles between himself and the Blackfoot camp, for while still so close, he must cover his trail. So he basically, for 3 days, he moves real slow, painstakingly, not leaving a
Covering
trail.
his back trail, yeah.
So they can't track where he goes. So he basically stays there. Instead of covering more miles, he only covers 10 in that 3 days because he's moving so slow to cover his tracks. In those 3 days, the snow drove in on him, first sifting in a few large flakes through the utter silence of the wilderness, then howling around him, a mass of cutting, blinding white needles, mounting in the washes, filling gullies and canyons. Johnson crawled against the full blast of the storm to the top of a ridge, then set out southeastward for his camp. Traveling through the icy mountains by day and crawling into whatever shelter the rocks afforded by night, the mountain man lived. What's crazy is, you hear the same thing in The Revenant, mauled by a bear, 300 miles or something, he crawls.
Right.
After being maimed and he can't walk, and he drags his body.
Correct.
Like, okay, I mean, the will to survive. This dude steals a leg and runs off, naked to the waist down.
Well, who would even think of stealing another human's leg?
A person who has been eating a lot of human flesh for a while.
I'm gonna rip
and
your
has
leg
no
off, so I have
qualms about it.
To
it's
eat.
like, oh, he doesn't snag a horse's leg.
No.
Just why kill a good horse?
Can't snatch the dog on the way out.
He snatched that dude's leg. He's giving him the stink eye.
Ouch.
It says that traveling through the icy mountain, crawling into whatever shelter rocks afforded by night, the mountain man lived. Now that the Blackfoot camp was distant, he could warm himself by a fire and thaw out one end of the leg he carried. At least the leg could not go putrid in such weather. He cut what stringy meat he could from it and spat out the gristle. Then one day on the Sweetwater, he hacked at the leg without first putting flame to it and broke his knife.
Ugh.
He threw away the pieces, gnawed, and went on. Dude, that man is mad. He's pissed off.
He's psycho.
He's like, I will live at all costs.
Like,
he's an animal. He's
it's too much time with crazy woman.
Fierce, like whatever. He's like an animal, like
it's true.
like a
It's
a
so
wolf.
true.
Whatever. You just do it.
Yep.
I mean, you're as primitive of a human being living as you can at this point for him.
Right.
And that is somewhat of those who survived. I do believe they became the most primitive of human. They had the most, civilization.
Well, I think a lot of it,
adapt,
you adapt, but then it still is instinctual. Like, I mean, over thousands of years we've adapted. But
one night in the Great Divide Basin, he was to discover that he still had one weapon after all. He had found a more than ordinary comfortable cave by the fire on its rocky floor. He had once been able quite to thaw out his emaciated body. His feet to the embers, a firm grip on his victuals, he fell into the sleep of exhaustion. I can't some of this sentence. But in the night he awakened, feeling a tug on his arm. He sat up. Framed in the cave's doorway against the glistening snow outside, he saw a large mountain lion pulling on the other end of the Blackfoot leg, trying to drag it outside. With a roar, the trapper leaped to his feet, tore the leg free, and chased the big cat outside. He was back in the cave soon enough, and again bedding himself down. But now he heard perhaps, a gaunt grizzly. Presumably the bear had been hibernating in the back recesses of the cave, had been disturbed first by the smoke from Johnson's embers, and now had been angered by the to-do with the cat. The bear advanced on Johnson, and Johnson advanced on the bear. I warn't, as he was later to tell you, in no good humor myself. Swinging his frozen food as a Stone Age man his club, the crow killer whacked the bear violently across its nose. Now the bear retreated a little, snarling its rage, and Johnson followed up on his advantage. Alternately dodging bear claws and smashing with the leg, he persisted only till the grizzly had had enough. With its last chilling roar, the bear turned and trotted not out of the cave, but back to its lair. Johnson left his cave, and his hope of a night's sleep went on. Delgue sat close to the heat of the roaring fire in his rock chimney, mending a broken moccasin, and just now clucking, he insisted, at the thought of Johnson deserting his trap lines to carry whiskey to the Indians. He took a pull at his pipe. He laid his mending aside to listen to the roar of the storm and to watch how the crude latch on his door quivered with the fury of the elements. At last, he stood up to tie the rattling thing down, but suddenly the whole door swung open. There, in the opening, were the wild gusts of winter and liver-eating Johnson.
Jeez.
Gue stood. The naked, red-bearded giant stood. The doorway between them. Dell studied in one long moment the flapping skins that had once been the giant's moccasins and leggings and the grin on the giant's cadaverous face. Now the giant unslung the frozen thing from his bony shoulder, threw it on the lean-to floor, and himself stepped in. How are you fixin' for meat, Dell? Said Johnson.
Jeez. Got some leg for you.
Wow. That's one hell of a story.
I mean,
okay? Man gets
captured.
captured. He's indignant. They get drunk. He fights free. And scalps the Indian, steals his leg, and then travels 200 miles.
200 miles back
to his cabin.
Yep.
Leaves a trail so they can't find him.
In the cold. No shirt.
And eats that Indian leg over that 200 miles. He probably covered how many miles in a day? I mean, for a true blue hiker, hardcore goer.
I mean, I don't.
Death Mike is 100 miles.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean,
how many miles do they cover? It's 2 days, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, within a few days, 3 days maybe. I was gonna say. I mean, there's no doubt that he's able to do 35, 40 miles in a day.
I thought they did 100 miles. They left that day, hiked all day and all night, and got there the next morning or something like that.
I don't know.
I haven't done that.
No,
because it's a little.
I think it's over a few days.
You're trying a little too hard. Okay,
yeah.
Lampert's just done it a couple times.
Yep.
It's just you're sick.
Yep.
But 200 miles. This isn't that far. I mean, we'll hunt. No. We'll hike 20 miles in a day of just hunting.
Right.
You know,
and that's
climbing,
again like
glassing.
we could obviously hike a lot more, but we're hunting while we're doing it.
Well, we're also hunting straight up vertical too,
right,
country.
Right.
A lot
exactly.
of times. So, if it was more like plains and more gradual. Yep. But the point is, 200 miles only takes probably a couple of days, few days for someone like him.
I seriously think there's no doubt that he's able to travel 35, 40 miles at least a day.
Yeah.
You know, and depending on terrain and stuff.
And then he's back.
He's back.
I went without food for 2 days on a hunt to see what it would, I ran out of food. I'm like, I'm staying here.
I think we've all ended up fasting a day
Literally
or two.
for 2 days, I had no food. And I'm like, the third day, I got food later that day, but in the morning I was like, I'm pretty famished, but I operated pretty well on just burning fat. And once you get over the idea of hunger, you're like, the body is actually pretty well adapted to.
I'll tell you this,
like
it's crazy, like when you fast and stuff, because when you do so, I would say there's a period. Yes, there's that period of hunger, but then there's a period of clarity that comes. Like you have super clear mind.
You got to know that going without food for a few days was pretty common back then, and they didn't worry about it too much. They knew they'd get some one way or another. And whereas today, the idea of going half a day without eating freaks people out.
Right, absolutely.
When back then, they could go a week and only eat like 2 meals that were tiny
on the first,
to get you through.
The first trip that Chaim has ever been on us with there at Peaks.
Yeah.
He wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
He hammered down his food within like a few days. And there was, before we went to our next stop as our pickup to get more food, he went 36 hours without food.
Yes, exactly.
And you know what? Like you can ask Chaim about it. He's like, I'm a better man for it. Like I didn't think I could do it.
I remember watching Remy trying to kill a fallow deer, I think, in New Zealand, or maybe it was a mule deer. I don't remember, but basically he ran out of food, and then he hunted that day and the next day, and then he's like, dude, I got to get back because I need food, or I need to kill something because I need food. And then finally he killed something, and it was as much of a relief to him because he actually got to eat it for his hike back. But you get out there and you gamble like that, you're not going to die generally. Yeah. As long as you have hydration and salt and things like that. But it's amazing what the body's actually capable of.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyway, interesting. So hope you're enjoying the book reading here. We're going to get into the next episode. Tune in for the next show. If you've missed the earlier episodes, go back, start from the beginning.
Yep.
If you're listening to this, we're off on some hunts right now, chasing game. It is the season, so hence the pre-recorded book podcast.
Yep.
Hope you enjoy this little shift of gears. If you have any books you want us to read or get into, let us know in the comments section of the YouTube videos. And like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And do us a favor and shop over at Stealthy Hunter, Mountain Ops, Peaks Equipment, Graxaw Game Bags, Sheep Feed Orthotics, any of those partners. You can look at the description field in all of our YouTube videos, and you will see all the partners that we work with. Go Hunt Gear Shop, Go Hunt Maps, Go Hunt Insider Membership. All that stuff is there, and you get discounts and deals, and it helps us do what we do.
Yep.
So we appreciate you. We thank you. We hope you're having an excellent hunting season.
We're so close to 100,000 subscribers
on YouTube. We're getting there.
So close.
Thank you, and stay gritty.